and many more tribal nations that are not federally recognized or no longer exist. We recognize the cruel legacy of slavery and colonialism in our nation and acknowledge the people whose labor was exploited for generations to help establish the economy of the United States. We honor Indigenous, enslaved, and immigrant people's resilience, labor, and stewardship of the land and commit to creating a future founded on respect, justice, and inclusion for all people as we work to heal the deepest generational wounds.
Great. Do you want to also introduce yourself?
I'm Matthew Hurt, Legislative Counsel to the Assembly.
Great, thanks for being here. Okay, so we, oh wait, hold on, what are we looking at here? Oh, I'm looking at the wrong agenda. Yeah, that's a problem. Okay, oh, because I was going to do not sure that my name is on there, but I'm looking at the wrong agenda. All right. Okay, so unfinished business. Teresa, do you have any updates on the Change Lab analysis?
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay. AARP did not pick them up for this next year, so we don't have that opportunity. All I have is the video.
Oh, okay,
So-
and you do, I know that you sent the video to Pastor May and me, and I neglected to watch it. Pastor May, did you watch it? No, okay, so we haven't seen that yet. Do you think that's, how long is it, Teresa?
It's, I want to say it's 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Do you think
I
it's,
can't remember exactly.
like, is it informative? Do you think it'd be worth spending time at one of our committee meetings to watch?
Let me look at it again.
Okay.
I think that's kind of why I sent it to you guys to see what you thought, because I was sort of on the, debating.
Okay, maybe if you can.
I was really hoping for the policy analysis, is what
Right.
I was hoping for.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, well, we'll kind of table that for the next time we're together, and if you have a recommendation then. And we can also talk about policy analysis in general at the work session on Saturday if people want to discuss that then. Okay, do we have any new member nominations? I think Candace, did you want to bring one?
I do have a new member nomination. I would like to offer for membership actually as a replacement to me. Hopefully everyone got a little note about my travel schedule and my hearing loss, although today I'm hearing beautifully, so, Murphy's Law, I guess. Thomas Pittman is the Executive Director of Identity. He is a health professional in health administration, a member of the Tlingit people, and shares our values of dignity and community. I think he would be an excellent representative of the LGBTQ plus community, and so I would offer him for membership. If he is a member, becomes a member, his first meeting would be in March.
Great. Any discussion from members?
Only thing I would say, Ms. Candace, was the, I guess whatever it was, the attachment you had was, couldn't open it.
Oh, bummer. It was a Word document sent to Jasmine, so there may have lost something in the translation.
Yeah, I think all three of us tried to open it and we couldn't open it.
Well,
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. But is what you just shared basically what was in the Word document?
basically, a little bit more. It had Thomas's history. He has a master's in health administration, the various companies that he'd worked for in that capacity, his heritage through the Tlingit people in the Glacier Bay area. That was basically it.
Great. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, Lori, go ahead.
I would just like to wish you well on your travels, Candace. It's been a pleasure being in several different committee meetings with you. And thank you so much for all you do for our community.
Thank you very much.
Ditto.
Great. Welcome, Celeste. We're just, we have a new member nomination for Thomas Pittman from Identity to replace Candace, because Candace is departing the committee for a few different reasons. So we're just talking about that.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Okay, any further discussion on Thomas Pittman? Any objections to Thomas Pittman becoming a new member starting in March? Okay, hearing none, sounds like we have a new member. Candace, thank you so much for your time and your dedication and being part of this committee. It's been wonderful. Celeste, did you?
Most welcome.
No,
Until he gets here.
yeah, no, I was just gonna add to that, to Candace. What? Okay, we'll talk later.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe before we go further, we've had a couple more folks join. Celeste, you want to just introduce yourself again?
Hello, everybody. It's good to be back. Celeste, of course, with the Alaska Black Caucus. Looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Great. And then can someone see who else that was?
Marie?
Oh, Marie, do you want to introduce yourself? Marie?
Oh, hello. It says I'm still connected. Do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Marie Husa, member of the Filipino American community, longtime resident of Anchorage. Thank you.
Great, glad you're here.
Mhm.
Okay, our main agenda item tonight is the presentation we're gonna hear from Zenobia. But before we get there, are there any kind of pressing committee member updates that anyone wants to share?
Can I defer until after the presentation if
Oh,
there's time?
sure,
Because
yeah.
I've got a few things I wanted to talk
Okay,
about.
yes, that sounds good, thanks, Lori.
Well, I did respond to, and I think during the, I guess the assembly update time, because a lot of that is question and answer kind of thing.
Sure.
Might be a good time.
Should we, actually, maybe, that's a good question, should we just move item 4D up before committee updates?
That was sort of my subtle.
Okay, is there any objection to doing that? Then we can have Zenobia present, she's also on the East Coast, so that she might appreciate that also.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any objections to that? And then we'll come to committee updates and assembly updates after that? Yeah, okay, great. So let's just think about timing. It's 20 to 5 right now, so just as long as, yeah, we should have time. Great, perfect. Okay, Zenobia, we'll hand it over to you.
Oh, okay. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so excited to meet,
Sorry about that.
Yeah, Taffy just joined.
excited to be talking about this work that I just completed. So my name is Dr. Zenobia Benefield. I am a health professor, health researcher, and consultant. And I am here to talk about a project that I just completed. And greetings from balmy Charlotte, North Carolina, where it is a beautiful 65 degrees right now. It will be 71 tomorrow. Super excited about that.
Well,
That is me doing a not so humble brag about that good warm weather we've got down here. So I'm really excited to talk about this project and to hear from you all, and just, to have a conversation about it. During the pandemic, it became clear, I think a lot of things became clear, right? COVID highlighted a lot of things about our society and various social problems. But one thing that became abundantly clear was the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black and Brown populations. And because of this disproportionate impact, many counties across the United States, at the time that I did my work, it was about 209 jurisdictions, passed a declaration stating that racism was a public health crisis. I was hired by Safe States Alliance, which is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to injury and violence prevention, to do really two big things. The first job I was to do was to assess whether these declarations were performative or actionable. My clients wanted to know, like, are they just saying this? Is this symbolic, or are they actually trying to make a difference in folks' lives? And then finally, what should we do about it, right? How should we move forward? So I read all 209 declarations, and I spoke to various stakeholders across the country, researchers, public health officials, and myself, along with many other scholars who have studied these declarations, found that yes, they were overwhelmingly performative. And the reason we came to that conclusion was any sort of legislation that doesn't have a clear, measurable outcome, you don't know what you want to happen, you don't have a budget, and you don't have a timeline, can't really do much, right? So they are performative to a certain point. But just because they were performative doesn't mean they were pointless. They were a rallying point for many organizations that have been dedicated to health equity work. And they were a starting point for a lot of grassroots organizations who sort of needed the language to mobilize around. So performative, yes, pointless, no. And that's a really important distinction. And so moving forward, one of the things Safe States wanted to know was, well, what should we do? How do we engage this conversation? And so my approach was to study not just the resolutions and the places where those resolutions were passed, but also to make notes of the areas where the resolutions did not get passed. I think just some important context, it's important to note that I think I mentioned about 209, according to the American Public Health Association, about 209 jurisdictions or counties passed these resolutions. That's about 10% of American counties. 10% of American counties. So this was not a movement that was taken up by the majority of American counties, which I think is important when we think about how do we engage equity work, how do we engage health equity work, particularly as it relates to racism. What should our approach be? What should our organizational strategy be? What sort of theoretical approaches are we mobilizing? And that's really where my recommendations lie. And I'd love to hear y'all's feedback about some of these suggestions. So I had 5 major suggestions, and I sent to Thea.
Yep.
Okay, I see you holding it up there. Okay, yeah.
And the recommendations are on the back of the handout.
Thank you. So my first recommendation was for my clients and really for many organizations engaged in health equity to reframe the conversation. At the time that I did my policy analysis, 25 states were currently rescinding the declarations or rescinding and stopping any work associated with DEI, anti-racism, equity, or justice. Those buzzwords were creating a full stop in terms of funding, in terms of organizational structure, in terms of hiring practices. Now, I was working for a national organization, and my argument to them is, if you are a national organization, let's be mindful that if we use language that shuts us down in half of the nation, we lose our ability to be efficient almost immediately before the conversation can even begin. We have such a, and I say we as our society, we have such a difficult time talking about racism in this country that even those of us with the best of intentions end up putting our foot in our mouths. And there's so much pushback that sometimes the racism entry, although there are so many reasons why it is important to talk about racism, it can often get in the way of getting things done. It's such an emotionally laden conversation, and it's full of objective facts that are viewed and interpreted subjectively, that it can get in the way of funding mechanisms, it can get in the way of hiring practices. And as a professor who's taught race in all types of environments, you don't start with the hardest part first, right? That's something you ease in after, you don't lead there. So my suggestion was, if we're going to reframe the conversation, let's sort of moving into my second recommendation, let's focus on local economic issues. So one of the things I noticed was most of the resolutions were passed by counties and city councils, excuse me. City councils are not set up to tackle large ideological issues. They don't have the staff, the personnel, the resources, or knowledge base to tackle that. So if you give them racism as a problem to tackle, we're wringing hands for 2 years. Let's focus on what they are set up to do, which is manage budgets, handle operations of those budgets, and answer to their constituents. One of the things I found a great example is Indiana, a completely red state, increased their public health spending by 1,500%, which is almost unheard of in red states, without ever mentioning racism. And what's interesting, right, when we think about racism in the United States, it is interwoven with classism. Right? Race and class are like this. So we can talk about economics and still get at the issues attached to race. Now, are there drawbacks to that approach? Absolutely, right? If we're talking about classism, while we may get, let's say, about 80 to 85% of the issues that overlap with racism, there's still that residual 20 to 15%, right? I mean, we're not going to cover it all. This is not necessarily a better approach, but it's more effective. It's often more effective because it crosses those racial lines, and it's easier for people to get behind injury and violence prevention. It's easier for people to conceptualize child care needs. It's easier for people to conceptualize these things as opposed to something that's so ideological that we have to first come to an agreement that it even exists. So I did some research on just perceptions of racism. Half of Americans don't even think it's real. You can't convince them that it's a crisis if they don't even believe that it exists, right? So as we think about this, let's think about how do we do work that people can get behind, and very importantly, work that won't be rescinded when a county goes from blue to red. We want policy that has longevity. And one of the things I saw in our swing counties was those counties that went from blue to red rescinded the policy, ended all of the hiring practices, and ended the programming. And I worked again with a national organization. We don't want policy that has an 18-month time frame, and every 2 years we're reinventing the wheel. And so as I thought about talking about this work for this committee, I listened to the YouTube video from the December meeting, and I listened to the call for more support in childcare, which is an American issue and quite frankly a global issue, right? And I think, and I don't remember the name of the person, but they requested support for elders providing care for younger children. That is a local economic issue, not just providing them education, but I'm a mental health scholar first and foremost. And I thought a great economic issue here is investing in trauma-informed care, right? That's something, especially in areas that have high addiction, mental health issues, behavioral health issues, often because unchecked childhood trauma becomes adult addiction. It becomes the increased likelihood of adults engaging in risky behavior. So when we're thinking about those local economic issues, prevention often falls under that category. And most people can agree, yeah, if we're going to support child care providers, one of the things that we should help them understand is when do we have children who are in trauma? How do we support children? How do we create environments that don't re-traumatize? And that's something that Indiana was able to do very effectively. So there are models for that work, again, that has reframed the conversation away from anti-racism into something that people across the aisle can get behind. My third recommendation, recognizing that we do live in a very diverse space. And I mean, there are going to be times when we are forced to talk about cultural differences simply just because of the nature of America, to use a strength-based model or an assets model. So one of the things I noticed when I read the declarations was that they all started with the disparities list, right, where they listed all of the ways in which people of color had worse outcomes than white Americans. When we lead with disempowering language, we create policy and programs that continue to disempower. And we often fail to recognize that groups that we would label as disadvantaged still have something to teach. And we often fail to recognize that what we could consider to be a net loss, so like for example, if we thought about the mortality rate between Black and white Americans, right? Black Americans have a lower life expectancy than white Americans, and that's often one of the leaders in our health disparities list. Right, that's a net loss. But we can also consider, well, considering the state of Black America and what it means to be Black in America, the fact that they are alive at all is amazing. And they're living much longer than they used to. And they've maintained a culture that is beautiful. And quite frankly, their culture is America's primary global export. Right? We can talk about Black Americans in an overwhelmingly negative light, or we can choose to talk about Black Americans in an overwhelmingly positive light. The way we speak about people dictates how we treat them. I studied linguistics for a while, right? What we call a thing, and thing being noun, what we call a thing dictates how we treat it. And so often when you look at health disparities work, the money always goes to the problem, and we look up and we say, well, why haven't we closed the gap? Sometimes we should think about putting the money into what is already working and allowing groups to continue to flourish. And as I listened to the meeting from December, and another speaker came on and talked about the homeless population and the unhoused population, one of the things I thought about were some of my colleagues who study social networks and social bonding and familial units in the homeless population. We have to find a way to talk about people that we would consider disadvantaged in a way that highlights their strengths, because that dictates the kinds of policy and programs that we create. Right? And then when you just think about it from basic psychology, right? Like, and I'll pick on Thea since I kind of sort of know Thea. Like, if I want Thea to change, just think of you, like, of yourself as a person. If I lead with Thea, you're kind of struggling on this point and that point, you're not doing good over here, and you're kind of lazy over there. I want you to be empowered to change. I mean, that kind of deflates you. Just as an individual, it deflates you. So leading with that empowering language, leading with a strength-based model, looking for what's thriving in a population and focusing there, I think it's not what typical health disparities research does. And I know because if you look at, like, my first couple of publications all use that negative non-assets model approach. But I think an assets approach and the research suggests that that policy is more supportive of the populations it seeks to help. My fourth recommendation, since I mentioned psychology and how we respond to things, was to not forget about mental health. I mentioned I'm a mental health scholar. That is my passion. That was sort of what drove me through my PhD. You know, I've been studying stratification and racism and inequality for over 15 years now. And when I speak to people and when I reduce what people say down to its most common denominator and sort of take away the story and the cultural subtext, when we talk about equity and racism in America, most people just want others to see themselves in an ecosystem instead of in a hierarchy. They want to see increased empathy, increased compassion for people who don't look like them. They want them to be able to give of themselves even when sometimes it's a little bit of a sacrifice and it feels uncomfortable. Those are psychological habits, right? Those come from a deeply rooted, from our inner psychological selves. And so, and I'm not saying that racism is not a structural problem and can be solved solely dealing with the individualistic inner psychology. However, we must remember that structures are made of people. So when you want to change structures, sometimes you gotta help change people, and addressing those psychological needs become important. My suggestion always is to partner. I love employee wellness programs. There's some really interesting experimental ones happening that are focused on employee wellness and the focus on psychological well-being. And the studies are extremely interesting. I follow positive psychology coming out of Harvard and Stanford. So of the Fortune 500, the C-suite, they're engaging in this mental health work and seeing what it does to productivity. So of course, the corporations are invested in it for its bottom line, but there are also these other benefits that are happening in terms of just increased employee compassion, increased employee empathy, and then that trickles down into policy, program, and practice. In the same vein, I mentioned in the report that I wrote for the clients to think about social emotional learning for K through 12. It is always excellent to invest in children. Healed children become healed adults, right? When we teach children that we live in an ecosystem, they grow up understanding and knowing that we live in an ecosystem, and thus our preservation is connected to everyone else's. This is a frame of thinking. And there are some great examples of this happening in New York in low-income environments that shows that not only does it create the results that we want, but it's replicable and fundable, right? There's a lot of mindfulness studies coming out of the federal government as well. And then my final suggestion was to just write all of this down. So as I talk to stakeholders across the country, I met so many people who are reinventing the wheel and doing various versions of this, and I was asking them questions, and then the interview always turned back on me, and they were like, well, what is everybody else doing, you know? And I was like telling people in Iowa what's happening in Anchorage, and telling people in Atlanta what's going on in Montana, and I realized that one of the best parts about my job is that I get to meet the most amazing, inspiring human beings on the planet, and I get to serve them to the best of my ability. And one of the things that I've learned about these people that I serve is that they tend to be very humble and not talk about what they do, which I get that, but people need to know what you're doing. People need to know your thought process and how you are figuring out that path A doesn't work and when path B does work. And so thinking about sort of an autoethnographic approach, just very detailed note-taking and thinking, how do you make this public? Because I think from my work, I've learned there are so many people who are doing the work, but are so overwhelmed by the magnitude of it and not knowing what to do first, not knowing how to navigate doing equity work in a red state, in a red space, in a purple space, not understanding how to partner with corporate partners, not knowing how to work through different strategies, thinking it has to be critical race theory or nothing, not knowing that race theory is a spectrum. There's critical race theory, there's interest convergence theory, there's racial formations theory. We can do this thing differently and still get the same results. My daddy used to say, there's more than one way to skin a cat, Zenobia. So, documenting these things, no matter what the process or product is, I think there's so much value in that information. And so that's, I wrote up 30 pages. It's always funny. I wrote 30 pages for them and y'all get 2. So that's that's sort of the crux and the summary of what I created for Safe States. And I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts and talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zenobia. So I wanted to invite Zenobia to come, partly because we were one of the folks that Zenobia interviewed, because Alaska passed a resolution at the Alaska Public Health Association in 2020 that racism was a public health crisis, and Alaska Black Caucus really helped make that happen. And so that was partly how I originally met Zenobia, was through that connection there. But I also thought that the results from the work that she did across the country that she just described to us would be informative as we go into our work session on Saturday and think about how do we want to do this work? I mean, we've been a committee now, in this forum, we've been a committee for just over a year. So October 2022, I think, is when we formally began. And so I think it's really, this is, it's not simple to figure out, how do we do this? How do we, what do you say, eat the elephant, or what's the word?
One bite at a time.
Yeah, so anyway, I thought that the recommendations that Zenobia shared that are based on these experiences all around the country might be useful to us as we go into that work session, and just as we all do the work that we're trying to do in the community. Because we all have tons of commitment and passion and a fair bit of energy. I'd say there's a fair bit of energy and commitment, but we want to see results. We want to do the work that's most effective. And so how do we really do that together? I think it's something we're all trying to figure out. So with that, what kinds of questions do you have for Zenobia? Maybe comments or thoughts that came up as you were listening?
I'll go first. Zenobia. For those that don't know, the Alaska Black Caucus is about to host the 5th annual Betty Davis African American Summit, Marching Till Equity, Equality, and Justice is One. And Zenobia is our keynote speaker at the luncheon, coming to Anchorage in person, and will speak at the health forum that follows the luncheon immediately after that. So you'll get a chance to hear more from her. But what I really appreciated in her talk today was reframing. This is hard for me, reframing the conversation, because part of me is like, why do I need to reframe, to get you to buy into, this. So I have to reframe the conversation for you to accept. So I was thinking of that as you were sharing, but in order to get them at the table to have that conversation, that I can see that. So thank you for that, Zenobia.
You're welcome. That was actually, I got not pushback, but that first recommendation, I had to sell it. I had to really, so the report, there's a really big chunk where I write out why. But, I had a therapist one time ask me, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? Right? And so one of the questions I pose to my clients is, do you want to be effective or do you want to be right? I'm not saying that you should have to, right? But what is your goal? Is your goal to push racism and anti-racism theory, or is your goal to increase the health of your population? Those are two different assignments. Each of them are great assignments, and I'm hired to do whatever you want me to do, right? And so I think, again, it's not fair. And it does require us to sort of, right, because I'm in my skin saying this, right? So I have to, right? But it's at the same time, it's like, but I know where I am and I know what I'm trying to get done, right? Yeah, but that was my, you're not the first person to respond that way. So fair enough.
But I appreciated the information, and I'm looking forward to February the 10th. Thanks.
I would say thank you, Zenobia, for your sharing on today. And relative to what Thea was mentioning a minute ago about takeaways as far as the work we do and how it could be applicable in our situation, circumstance, and what have you, there are some takeaways that I took that were interwoven throughout your whole discourse. And a few of them is the fact that language, used from the top down is most important. How you utilize the language, how you as you say, frame the issues. A lot of this was supposed to be centered around racism and the health, crisis and how it affects that, envy, violence, prevention, and all of that. But addressing inequities without specifically addressing or targeting racism per se in terminology that goes straight to racism, but yet addressing the inequities without just diving into that. And I see that all the way through your discourse. And relative to all of that is how you speak to persons or how you speak to situations is a big difference maker. And I caught those that were interwoven throughout all of your discourse. And I guess that goes to what Ms. Celeste was saying a minute ago. Sometimes that comes hard for people of color, like me and that kind of thing, because you want to go straight to the it of it, the crux of it. But the bottom line is how you frame it is important. And if you can get your point across in addressing inequities without always pulling the race card, then it might be beneficial. Yeah. And I think that speaks to much of what we are about relative to this committee.
All right.
I really appreciate what you have shared, and it's really a hard pill to swallow for me personally. And I agree with you, because when I work one-on-one with people, I understand you got to meet people where they are, and that's the only way that you can help move them. But when we're doing this work, when we're asked to do equity work, and we're trying to speak in just like you were sharing about being positive, saying, intentionally under-resourced communities, intentionally excluded communities. Those exclusions mainly happen because of race or class issues. And so if we're going to navigate and thread that needle, how do we not hold the communities responsible with that sort of negative speak, which we're working really hard at my agency to not use, but also not address the reasons that they have been under-resourced, intentionally left out, all of the barriers put in place with redlining and, I could go down a list that you are well aware of, so I don't need to do that. But how do you really thread that needle when you're trying to work in that space?
Yeah, so I agree with how hard it is. Right, again, I'm in this skin doing this work, so I agree about the pill that's hard to swallow. Even before I wrote the report, I had to take a break and just deal with the emotional labor of what I had to write. But you said something really important that I talked with my clients about: holding people responsible and accountable. You have to have power to hold somebody responsible and accountable. That's a power dynamic there, right? It's hard to hold someone responsible and accountable if they hold all of the resources. You have no, and if you don't, then you have nothing there. So so when we think about holding people accountable, we have to be mindful of the power dynamic in which we are working, because you cannot hold a group accountable or a power structure accountable and then say, and we need $250,000, because Can I please have $500,000? It doesn't work that way. And just look at how the funding mechanisms work, right? It doesn't work that way. So it's not right. It's not desirable. And we can have a question about the ethics of it and should we have to do it. But we are living in a power structure built on race and economics, right? And America is not really, she's given us, I always say this, 400 years of evidence that she is going to play games when it comes to race. And she's going to, throw the rock and hide the hand. Now, in economics, she's a little bit more willing to make some conversations, especially when we think about these sort of cross-racial coalitions. And sometimes it's about biting that bullet and thinking I need to get it done because I am going to come around and ask for $250,000. I am going to come back and ask for, these certain things. So, how do we do the work? For myself, I can't tell other people how to do it. I struggle sometimes with folks. Right? I live in the South and I live in a rural town where they fly the Confederate flag everywhere. So I drive past, the bars and the stars everywhere. It's hard, right? It's not easy. And I teach in this environment. And they don't agree with me about what those flags mean, what the statues mean. I have to realize that different groups of people can hold the exact same set of facts and come out with different conclusions. And that no matter how much I convince them or try to convince them that my story is the true story, that they have every right to say, I hear you, Zenobia, and I disagree. The same way that I wouldn't consider that rebel flag to just be Southern pride, right? And once I can accept that we are just not going to agree on this, we can get down to business, which is really what I want is this policy changed, money put into this school, this infrastructure done. And one of the things I mentioned in the report is there is a theoretical underpinning to this. So Derek Bell talks about interest convergence theory. So this is different than critical race theory that comes out of UCLA, Kwame Ture, Black Power, right? Derek Bell argues that any benefit or any growth or civil rights given to minority populations in the United States has always converged with the interest of the dominant majority, right? So the civil rights movement wasn't about America getting a moral compass and deciding to be good to Black Americans. It just looked really horrible for white kids to be getting treated so horribly in Selma, especially when America was trying to be a global babysitter and tell other people how to behave. The same thing with the freeing of the enslaved. This was not about like abolitionists finally winning and saying, see, we told you that they're human beings. It was in the best interest of Northern white power structures to free this group of people. So when you look at the evidence, right, America doesn't make decisions based on morality. America makes decisions based on what supports her economic power structure. So if you understand that, then you don't engage her with a moral argument. She's not going to talk to you in that way. You've got to speak to her in the language in which she engages, which is money as it converges with, hey, all of these issues impacting these BIPOC populations also impact 40% of white Americans. And you know you don't want us building bridges, so get it together, right? Now that's when you hold them accountable. And quite frankly, that's when the Black Power movement became the most lethal and the most dangerous, when those bridges were built around economics. So is it easy? No. Is it fair? No. But there's a theoretical, and I think there's evidence to suggest it's one of the most effective ways to get this nation to move. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? I know you probably still don't agree, and I totally
Economic driven, yes.
No, I totally, this is Lori who asked the question earlier. I completely understand what you are saying, and I see the value in it, and I know it, and I've been working in that system, and I really appreciate it. I mean, this has been really powerful for me, because I work a lot in this space, and you're blowing my mind a little bit, so that's new for me lately, so thank you.
Hannah had her hand up, and then so did Asher.
Great. Sorry, who was the first person?
Hannah.
Oh, great, Hannah, you're here. Go ahead, Hannah.
Hello, Zenobia. We don't know each other, but I look forward to meeting you because your fourth recommendation in your key recommendations is the foundation for my doctoral journey. I will be defending my dissertation in March. Yes, ma'am. And it is about addressing structural interventions to address mental health disparities in BIPOC populations in Anchorage. So it's a safe space for people because everybody now is about adolescent mental health and future capital, et cetera, et cetera. So we can get to Rome. We may take two different roads, but we can get there. So I look forward to meeting with you. Thank you.
Congratulations. Good for you.
Hannah's also a longtime school nurse here at one of our big high schools, so. Who is the other person? I'm sorry, I can't see the raised hands from here, Justin.
Asher.
Oh, great, Asher, go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to say that I just found myself, nodding along in agreement with a lot of what you said, Zenobia. I agree with, I think, everybody who's mentioned it, that it is a difficult pill to swallow for marginalized communities to not be able to have people at least recognize the past and what that has led to. I would say that I think, like some other issues, it's not for a white guy like me who gets to make that decision. So I think that the decision can ultimately be made by Black and brown communities if they say, I am willing to swallow that pill, and in order to get the results that we want, because you're right, when you talk about race, we are also talking about socioeconomics. And so if the end goal is ultimately we want to see less disparity based on skin color, based on race, based on ethnicity, then and the marginalized communities say, yes, I am willing to take this route, then it seems like a good approach to me that will help and get the results that we want.
I have a comment, but who else is in line? Pastor May, do you want to do that?
Well, I did. I think, Zenobia, could it be that to some degree the discourse utilized would be relative, and by that I mean there are certain circumstances and situations where, to a degree, what I'm hearing is you have to go at it covertly and to get to what it is you want to get to. But then, by the relativity of it, there are some situations where your best modus operandi would be hitting it head on.
I mean, everything is it's situational, right? I was working for a national organization, so I'm helping them think about meeting national needs. If you're in like a Portland or an Atlanta or a Philly, you may be able to just hit it on the head because you're going to have support from people no matter what skin color they have. I think it is situational. Where I'm from North Philadelphia, we call it finesse. You have to be able to read the room and know how to speak to the room. I think the issue with racism, so one of the things I did for this report is I sort of just did a little like a temperature check on the state of just the perspective of racism in this country. What's interesting is the growing Black and BIPOC conservative movement that is joining the white conservative movement and its pushback against racism and anti-racism. So there is this assumption that if you have melanated skin, you have these same monolithic ideas about racism and its presence from the historical to the contemporary. And the growing BIPOC, but the particularly growing Black conservative movement, it's showing that even in Black communities, it's fractured. So even in liberal spaces where you may think, well, there are predominantly Black folks here, they're going to be on the bandwagon. In a lot of predominant Black spaces in the South, they were the ones pushing no critical race theory in the schools, right? Black families were saying, we don't believe in this. It's not holding us back. We don't want this taught. So it's a lot more nuanced than I even thought about going in, right? Which is why you can't even assume when we go into a room that who's in the room is who's in the room, right? And then, as a race scholar who studied linguistics, when we talk about race and racism, most of us, like if I say zebra, we all picture probably the same thing. When I say race and racism, who knows what's in people's minds? So the first thing you have to do is start defining, right? And getting language. But nobody has time for that in the scrolling 30-second attention span. So it just becomes, and this is me thinking as a professor, right? As someone who has 17 weeks and 90 minutes to get 120 some odd people on the bandwagon and let's go, right? Sometimes I'm all about, I like to be efficient. I like to be efficient and I like to be effective. And sometimes what's right or what we appraise to be what is right, the principle can get in the way of the process. Sometimes the principle gets in the way of the process. Sometimes the principle gets in the way of the product. And so my suggestion only is to really appraise your landscape and think about what is the most effective and efficient way for me to get from point A to point B, right? And that will look different for Anchorage compared to a Detroit. But I think before we jump in and do the work, we should really be clear about that socio-cultural, political landscape, because we can sometimes shoot ourselves in the foot by leading with the principle, right? But maybe we should just lead with the product. What we really want is $500,000 in green spaces, right? That may be more effective than starting with 400 years ago, right? Starting with the 1619 project. The 1619 project is valuable. Is it always helpful? Was the question I was raising in the report. So yeah, situational for sure.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just share my comment question, and then I think there was one other person, and then we probably have to move to our other agenda items. But
No.
Okay. It's not my fault. But anyway, okay. This is the so I just thinking this discussion, thinking about what we're sharing here. I guess one of the things that I am constantly trying to do in this work is, as a white person, as really a member of the country that really colonized the crap out of the whole world, which is England, which is, where I came from, to come to here on Denina land, is, and as we kind of come together as the group we are, and all the different groups that we're part of, working towards equity, which at our work session last year, Pastor May, I think gave a really kind of sort of Zenobia-esque definition in a way, because it's very practical. You said it's equal opportunity predicated on equal resources. And so it doesn't, mess around. Like, it's just saying, like, do we all have the same opportunity? Are we all afforded the same resources? If not, we're not living in an equitable community yet. We have work to do, right? So what's my role in that conversation? Well, I think what I'm thinking about as we're having this conversation is that when we talk about racism, we have to, I think when we have those conversations, we have to, like as a white person, I have to own that. I have to be like, yeah, those were my people. Like we did that for hundreds of years and we're still benefiting and I'm still benefiting from it personally. You know, like my personal life today, I benefit, right? My children benefit. So, and that's, I think in the culture that I grew up in, that tends to create this feeling of shame and guilt. And then you kind of shut down. Like that's the culture that I grew up in. You know, it's not about like, okay, well, what can we do next? It's like, that feels awful. Like I'm done, right? And so where do you go with that? Where I want to go is to what I think we're doing here and when I read Martin Luther King, what I think he's saying, which is we have to work together. Like we have to work together. There isn't a way to do this without working together. And I also think of that Isabel Wilkerson quote that I know we've talked about here, where it's like, we don't know who built the house, but we're all living in the house now, and it's got this cracked foundation, and the paint's coming off the walls, and like we all have to work on that, right? So I guess kind of that's what I'm hearing in our conversation today is how do we find the places where we really can bring our like true selves, our full selves together to do this work. And what's the best way to do that? I guess that's what I hear you saying, Zenobia, and it's not, like you said, we all can have a lot of rich conversation about how we got here, and we should have those conversations. But in a way, those are like, maybe we have those conversations, I guess maybe that's my question. Where do we have those conversations? Where do we talk about racism? And then when and where do we talk about, okay, gosh, I just looked at this yesterday, 40% of households in Anchorage, where it's a female head of household and there's children under the age of 5, 40% of those families are living in poverty. Like, if that isn't a disparity, like what is, So, like, how do we decide when we talk about which and what we do in which spaces? I think that's kind of our question.
Yeah, and let me say that conversation in and of itself can be very divisive. I was part of a group that dealt with race reconciliation and justice, and we invited a whole bunch of different cultures in, and specifically the Caucasian race and all of that. And when you get to, we opened the whole thing by sharing personal experiences and we're at the vantage point where everybody was coming from who were at the table. And, when everybody shares, that was not really an issue, when ethnicity is shared, be it Caucasian or other ethnicities, what have you. But when you begin to share your personal experiences, lived experiences and all of that, then from that very first week on, the crowd was diluted. And the more you delved into it, the more the crowd diluted. Because there were certain things that certain people didn't want to embrace, didn't really want to hear about. As far as Celeste was saying, and Zenobia, when you look like me and you start talking about it, if we're going to be transparent at the table, you say, when do we talk about it? Sometimes it's good and sometimes it isn't. When you start talking about your experience of seeing Klansmen open up a trunk in your neighborhood as a kid and jump out with hoods and shotguns, and you talk about having to be in the first group of people that were bused in integration when there's 9 of us had to get off the bus, literally fighting just to get into the building, and those that were supposed to be on guard wasn't doing anything about it, that kind of thing. And when you grown up from a kid and seeing different restrooms and going to a fountain and you can't go in and sit at the bar and all, when you have those kinds of experiences, everybody don't want to hear about that, and it's divisive. And so when you come from a space like that, and you get to hearing what we're hearing today of kind of which we who have wanted to make collective change, has kind of had to operate in that space that she's talking about. Sometimes you have to go ahead and covertly to accomplish what you want. But when you openly espouse where you've come from and what you've witnessed and experienced, everybody's not able to handle that, you know. And so sometimes you hold back on your experiences and just deal with what you need to deal with in immediacy. Yeah. You don't speak to your point. Yeah.
So Toffee's had her hand up. I just want to recognize her.
Toffee, go ahead.
Thank you. Sylvia, thank you very much for this presentation. I think this reminds me of like pro-Palestine does not necessarily mean anti-Israel, right? Like I think the polarization, like very often, right, it continues to be like people don't think of things as like in a spectrum, right? And just because you're pro-trans does not mean you're anti-cis, right? In LGBT movements. And so like I think your presentation today will help us as we move forward in creating what we need to focus on in this team, right? That we understand what who's in power and what they have control over, and how can we create narratives or I guess ask in a way that it's like heard, right? And then of course there is going to be time where when we need to talk about racism, we have to talk about it, right? And just speak the truth into what's happening. But like there are times where we have to like give and take. Like it's negotiation, right? And so I feel like that's what you were. I mean, that's what I would take back. Like how very often people talk about pro-faith means that you're anti-spiritual, right? But that's not true, right? And so like it's very important. Like I feel I really appreciated your presentation because it reminds me of like this dichotomy that tends to be there all the time, and people think in dichotomy, and it just continues to keep us separated from each other instead of trying to come together. So, but yeah, that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for saying that. So just for some context on who I am a earth hippie, super optimistic, loving person. I love this country. This is our home. And I love y'all, right? Like that's why I am driven by love and I'm driven by conscience. And as a professor, I watched the dichotomies happen for a very long time. And we often lose the us in the conversation. And we lose that shared humanity. One of the things that I just want to sort of just hearing from Pastor May and hearing from you, Toffee, healed people cannot have healthy conversations, or unhealed people cannot have it's getting late over here on this side of town, y'all.
Unhealed people cannot have healthy conversations.
Right? Yeah. So it's hard to come to a conversation as sensitive as race if you don't have empathy for yourself or others. Sometimes we're starting at step 20 when we need to be at step 1. Some people don't even know how to hear, right? So I learned that when I was a professor, I had to first teach my 20 and 25-year-old babies just how to listen, how to actively listen, and how to engage with something that you don't like. They didn't know how to do it. Most of us don't have that skill set. So we want to jump into a conversation. And then too, thinking about melanated people. I one time had some students, Black young women, say they didn't understand white privilege. How can white people not get it? And we did an activity about American privilege. Right? When we leave the US, we're not Black Americans, we're Americans. Right? Now let's look at how our practices and how our purchasing habits and how our voting, right, how we become the white people for various other societies across the globe. Now, how much of that privilege are you willing to give up? And then they're like, okay. So now we're not as upset, right? It's these activities in empathy and understanding, I think, in general, that life is hard. that we all got here and inherited a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't want, and that navigating that and unpacking it is a lifelong journey. And sometimes you just have to give somebody the benefit of the doubt that even if their best is not good enough for you, it's their best. Yeah, we can still get something done, right? And to your point, Tafi, that if we support this one thing, it doesn't mean we are against everything else. It means that we are for I'm a mother. I need America to be here for the next couple of generations. You know what I'm saying? I need her to be here and I need her to be well. And so trying to do this work in a way that is not about twisting somebody's arm and getting them to, admit that they were wrong, or it's about finding that common ground and being able to move forward. Again, I'm a researcher, I'm a teacher. That's what I learned you have to do. And so I'm glad that you picked that up in my work. Thank you for saying that.
Love is the key.
Yep. Okay, this has been fantastically fabulous. Thank you, Zenobia. And it is super exciting that ABC is going to be bringing Zenobia up February 10th, Betty Davis, East Anchorage High School. I think we'll be there 10 to 3. Is that right, Celeste?
9 to 5.
Oh, 9 to 5. Okay, cool. It's getting bigger. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. So February 10th. And Zenobia, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And you're welcome to stay. And you're also welcome to go because I know it's late for you. So, but we'd love to have you if you want to stay. So.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Okay, let me find the correct agenda. Spread all over it. All right. Okay, I think we're back to committee updates. Lori, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, I had a couple things, and I had a couple things, and I don't want to dominate the time, but I would like to request from the municipality some guidance on the roof removal of snow. I'm hearing that many people are being, it came out in the Daily News that it's a good time to remove the snow, but the communications that are coming out about that are very unclear. And also there's nothing coupled with it for people who might really fall into the risky homes, or any research being done on who are in the risky homes. Many of the people that we work with on a regular basis, if they've purchased their own home, they tend to be older homes in some of the other neighborhoods and might not have the capacity to clean a roof or understand how critical it is. And I'm not seeing any good communication about that and about resources and what to do. So that's just sort of a personal request.
Can I add to that a bit, Lori? The other request I would have is if there's guidance for landlords. We have a community where a lot of landlords prey on tenants with low income, and there hasn't been a lot of guidance released for or requirements for landlords for those properties too. And I'm concerned about a lot of those.
Can we just give Felix maybe a chance to respond if there's anything going on that Felix that you're aware of, or anything? Like, would you direct these questions to a particular person or place, or is it something the assembly will consider?
Yeah, thanks. So I do not really have any new information. I just know what's been put out publicly. Is there anyone from the administration in the room?
No, Junior's not here today.
Okay, then yeah, these are things that I would have to take to the administration to build communications around, and I'm happy to be that conduit.
That's great, thank you, Felix. Lori, was there another item?
There is. There's one other one that's really critical, and then more if everybody gets to go and we still want to hear from me. But the next one is that a lot of work has been done statewide on digital equity. We've got the digital equity plan, and part of really pushing all that information out was signing people up for the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is about 2 months from not having funding. And there's a lack of clarity for me, and even when other people on our team have reached out, What I'm most concerned about was that we were asked to put a lot of effort into helping people sign up for this plan, and then it becomes provider specific on how the plan ends. And what could happen is that people just lose that connectivity plan and then start to get bills from the provider at the full rate. And there's no requirement, as far as we know, that providers have to stop providing that because they did sign up for the plan. And I need, this is a national issue, and it could be all of a sudden it gets funded, but if it does not, then we will be losing the trust of people that we were really asked to help with this plan, and it affects the entire state. And so I'm just putting it out there because it's just a situation I don't know how to even give communication around and don't understand what's happening.
Lori, where's the funding from?
Feds.
Is it coming through the state or?
It goes from the feds to the provider. So people like apply with, who we've been working with is primarily GCI. And so I don't see any guidance on GCI's website, don't really know who I need to reach out to, and also just spreading the word, because it could be, the school districts helped individuals apply for that so that their kids could have access to the internet. And, there's been a whole team and communication gone around to help people apply for that throughout the whole state. And what happens if it ends? Felix, do you have any idea?
Sorry, can you restate that question?
Do you know what's happening with the potential ending in a couple months of the internet connectivity plan, where everybody gets a certain amount per month to access the internet if they qualify, such as, I think it's like $60 or $70 a month?
Right. Yeah, the Assembly hasn't been briefed on that issue.
Anyone else on the committee know anything or have any leads?
So this is Teresa. I'll ask our folks at National and see if I can get any information.
Lori, is that the one that went also through the Rasmussen Foundation?
Mm-hmm. So the Rasmussen Foundation is the one that hosted doing the digital equity plan. And they're finished with that. They're done funding it. The plan's been created. The comment period is over. But it was through that plan providers were pulled together that were really pushing for this process to happen.
Okay, so they were kind of like the
But after the Rasmussen completed that process, there's a stand-up group now that is still in existence that probably can respond to your question. And I would contact the Rasmussen Foundation to find out exactly who that organization is or that group is, and then just go from there.
Thanks.
Any other committee member updates?
So I'll go next. For those that don't know, February is Black History Month. And there's going to be a large number of activities and programs and projects that are occurring. I would just really love to see some of my people here at some of the activities and programs and events that the Alaska Black Caucus is hosting, especially the Betty Davis African American Summit on February the 10th. And again, it's from 9 to 5. The theme, Marching Till Equity, Equality, and Justice is Won. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Celeste. Any other committee updates? I see someone in the chat. Who's that?
Asher just said he'll be at the summit.
Oh, great. Good. That's awesome, Asher. Any other updates?
Great. Well, I'll throw out just a couple things then.
Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
I led help finding it. I can't find it on the website, but I just heard that might be interesting to this committee. The Advocacy Day training by the, I think it was Owen that shared it, so it might be the Coalition to End Homelessness that's putting it on. And I heard about it briefly and I can't find it, so if somebody wants to give an update on that. And also, thank you so much to Pastor May and Brenda from Alaska Black Caucus for standing up with us to receive the Healing Racism Day from the Assembly. That was an example where I think there was a lot of good intention, but it was a bit of an uncomfortable reading there based on the way the audience felt about hearing. That was the feedback I got anyway. It was pretty clearly calling out the systems and the racism that exists in the community in a way in which Assembly members needed to vote against it.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I was shocked, honestly. Well, maybe not shocked, but I was taken back by the fact that we did have 2 Assembly members that did not support the resolution. And I don't understand why, but maybe just some of what Zenobia shared speaks to it. It's very unfortunate.
Taylor? I was just gonna say I have that invite and I'll send it to you, and it's put on by I'll send it to the group to send out, and it's put on by the Anchorage Coalition and the Balance of State Coalition.
Thank you.
Okay, how about Assembly updates? Felix, is there any items you want to bring to the committee?
Yeah, sure. So just a few things from me. Let's see. You already talked about that. So quick updates on the Port of Alaska. So there's, as it has been usual, there's 2 things for the port for folks to keep in mind as the Port of Alaska modernization project continues. First is the funding piece. The Assembly will next month be looking at the possibility of authorizing our chief fiscal officer to have authorization of $400 million in revenue bonds to move the project forward. So that's a big financial step that we are going to be looking at. And then we're getting closer and closer to final design for the current phase of the PAMP that we are in, specifically regarding terminals 1 and 2. So those things are moving forward. Just because it came up at the last committee meeting, just to keep you all in the loop, the Assembly did end up voting with regard to the Don Young recommendations around the port to rename the Port of Alaska the Don Young Port of Alaska. The Assembly has just finished its process regarding bonds and ballot propositions, so there's a whole variety of different bonds and ballot propositions that folks will be able to vote on in April. I think 2 of note for this committee. One is a restroom-related proposition called Anchorage Goes. Very snarky, whoever came with that. And it's essentially a proposition to get set up 10 Portland Loo style, which is the definitive term there, public restrooms around the municipality. And I think it's something that we've talked about a lot, is the lack of public restrooms in the municipality on our trailheads, etc. So that'll be something for the voters to vote on. And then there's also a ballot proposition, a change to our municipal charter to require the confirmation of the chief medical officer. And currently that's not a Assembly confirmation position, it is a mayoral appointment position. So that's something that we need to send to the voters to see if they're okay with changing that and requiring the Assembly approval of that. A couple housing things. The Assembly recently approved $1.5 million in alcohol tax for the Next Step pilot program, which is an aggressive effort to house 150 individuals and provide them with supports by April 30th. So excited for that work to continue, because it really started in December. And then we have also taken some efforts regarding 3plexes and 4plexes to make them easier to build and less expensive to build, so that we can maybe get more of that missing middle housing, more dense housing. And then we're also considering looking at short-term rental regulations and mainly a licensure requirement just to get a sense of short-term rentals and the impacts that they are having on our market. Last thing I'll mention is the Eklutna River restoration. So the Assembly recently put it into municipal code that it is the policy of the municipality that we are in support of a full restoration of the Eklutna River. And that is going to become, I think, a hotly debated topic soon because essentially the proposal that others have put forward that will eventually get sent to the governor, who will make the decision, is that all but the last mile of the Eklutna River will be restored, and we want everything to be restored on the Assembly. And so we put that into our code as our official policy and also into our legislative program. That is it. Happy to take any questions.
All right.
Felix, I know that you're well aware of this, but I just would like to state that it's so hard to testify at Assembly meetings. And this last Tuesday, I really felt for people who didn't know if they should or shouldn't testify, and people who are unhoused living in their car that I know wanted to speak on the Girdwood and just want to be heard. And anything that this committee could do to help support as equitable opportunities for people to be heard at Assembly meetings. I know this one was particularly rough, but it was really hard to watch. Thanks.
That is, just so we know, that is something that's in our annual plan from last year. So when we get to our work session this weekend, that's something we could talk about. I mean, I'm sure there are things our committee could do to help. For example, we could have kind of a rota of us willing to go, and be there with people. So anyway, and probably there's other more important, more impactful things we could do too. So.
Felix, I'm curious about how outcomes from some of these would or are tracked, especially when it comes to equitable outcomes. So it feels like probably the Anchorage Goes project would increase, restroom access for all communities, but especially more equitable access, and then as well as for the housing outcomes. I'm curious about that concern for equity in those as well.
Yeah, thanks. So for the restroom one, there's actually there was funded a study that I think should be ongoing to look at the gaps in accessibility to restrooms, which is really a municipal-wide issue, and determine what are the best locations for possible public restrooms if they were to be stood up that would most help to meet those gaps. And so that is a study that is ongoing. And then with regard to the Next Step initiative, so the Next Step initiative, they are going to be a very data and metric focused initiative. And their data comes from AKHMIS, and AKHMIS has a lot of demographic information that we can use. And we're going to get regular reports on Next Step and who's being housed, how that's all working. But essentially, the way that the program is going to work is that the folks who are staying at the Alex Hotel, which is one of our 3 major emergency cold weather shelter sites, they will be housed through the Next Step program. And it's just been determined by all of the partners that is the population that we want to house. And that particular, having walked through and met several of the residents in the Alex Hotel and really in all of our locations, the population experiencing homelessness, and particularly the ones who take advantage of emergency cold weather shelter, I think do tend to be probably more representative of our community, do tend to be members of the BIPOC community. So, my sense is that the folks who will benefit most from this are probably going to be the folks who will need it the most. I think what's going to be the big question for me is how this is going to be replicated and used in the future when we don't have emergency cold weather shelter and when we have camps that are going to be standing up in April or May, whenever that happens, how we can make sure that those individuals get access to whatever future housing resources come online. And that's going to be, I think, a big issue that I hope we tackle.
Thank you for that. I'm excited to see those results. Last I checked, the Alex was about 60% white, which is not super reflective of the people experiencing homelessness. So I'm hopeful that's not the case for those being housed and excited to hear more.
Great. We're almost out of time. I just want to check and see if is there any audience participation? Okay, hearing none. We are meeting on. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This is Teresa. I thought of one thing that I'm not sure everybody knows, but the senior longevity bonus or senior longevity payments that seniors get who are moderately low and low income. That program is due to sunset. And so it's one of the things that AARP is going down in a couple weeks to talk with legislators about. But it affects 9,000 seniors in Alaska. So it's our most low income and then all under federal poverty guidelines income, low income. So if you have seniors in that who are getting that payment, we may need them to talk with their legislators this year. And they get between 75 to 250 a month. So it's a significant part of their income.
Great, thanks, Teresa. Just two other opportunities to engage the childcare fund. We had Trevor and anyway, Trevor and his associate were here in December.
Nora.
Sorry?
Nora Mattel.
Nora, that's right. Thank you so much. Yeah. Trevor and Nora were here. There's a number of opportunities to give your input as well as a survey. There'll be a Make It Monday forum if anyone goes to that at the chamber. But I think they're looking for input, and I filled out the survey recently. I would really encourage you to do that. And also the alcohol tax is where my company Anchorage is working with a steering committee to develop a strategic plan for spending of the alcohol tax, and we're just about to start the kind of community engagement piece. I'm pretty sure there'll be an opportunity to give your input at the Betty Davis Summit. We're kind of working with Celeste on that. And Toffee also has a community event coming up. So anyway, there'll be opportunities for that. So I'll keep you posted as those get set. And don't forget to come. We're meeting right here, right? Yep.
Yes. Do you want to extend real quick so you can approve the agenda?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, yeah. Is there any objection to extending for 5 minutes? Might not take that long. Okay.
No.
Hearing none. Okay, so we have an agenda for Saturday. We'll meet here also on Teams, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pretty simple agenda, just looking at our 2023 annual plan and kind of selecting from there our priorities for this year, as well as looking at the other pieces of it and seeing if we want to add or change anything. Is there any changes or additions to that agenda that anyone wants to make? Okay, hearing none. Is there any objection to us approving this agenda? Great, hearing none. Okay, so this is our agenda for Saturday. I know not everyone can make it, but even if you can pop in by Teams for part of it, that would be great. But we'll look for those of you who can make it to come here 10 a.m. on Saturday. We didn't make any arrangement for food or anything, so if anybody wants to bring some snacks, feel free. I'll try to do that too. And I'm looking forward to it. Anything else for the good of the order?
Good of the order.
Okay. If there's no objection, we're adjourned.